Official history is lying. For decades, we have been fed a sanitized, convenient version of the demise of the pride of the Soviet fleet. But the truth turned out to be much darker and more absurd. The Battleship Marat, a legend that turned into a pile of twisted metal in a single second. Was it a fatal miscalculation, betrayal, or the devilish luck of a German ace adventurer? Why did Soviet propaganda hide until the very end that the flagship of the Baltic Fleet had ceased to exist back in '41? Today, we are stripping away the secrecy surrounding the events of September 23rd. You will see how, a second before the explosion, an elite ship turned into a mass grave. And you will learn why a drowned wreck continued to fight back with fire when, by all laws of physics, it should have been resting on the seabed. This is not just a chronicle. It is an investigation that turns everything you thought you knew about the great naval battle upside down. Prepare yourselves. What you are about to hear will make you doubt every word in the history books. Watch until the end. You have never heard anything like this before. Kronshtadt, September 23rd, 1941. 11 o'clock in the morning. The morning was unusually clear, almost implausibly clear for September on the Baltic. Visibility, tens of kilometers. The water in the harbor was calm. Sunlight lay on the deck in even rectangles. On the Battleship Marat, the morning watch was ending. Then, somewhere high in the sky, a hum appeared. Battle stations were sounded after 10 in the morning. Sailors ran along the companionways. Anti-aircraft gunners swiveled their barrels. The ship's commander, Captain Second Rank Ivanov, went up to the bridge. Somewhere over Peterhof, silhouettes of planes were already visible. Dark dots that grew larger with every second. Then everything happened very quickly. A German Junkers 87 dive bomber went into a dive at an angle of almost 90 degrees, straight at the bow of the Marat. A bomb weighing 1,000 kilograms, for comparison, that is about the weight of a small car, struck exactly in the forward part of the ship. The ammunition for the first main caliber turret exploded. Imagine an artillery turret. Several dozen tons of steel. That is about as much as 7 or 8 adult elephants gathered together. The blast wave threw it into the air like an empty soda can. The turret flipped over and crashed back into the breach it had created in the deck itself. The ship's forward superstructure, battle stations, control instruments, anti-aircraft guns, the conning tower with all its equipment and everyone who was there, toppled onto the starboard side and went into the water. The forward smokestack fell right after it. 326 people died at their battle stations. Among them were the ship's commander and his senior assistant. And once again, silence hung over Kronshtadt. And now I will tell you the reason we are here. For almost 4 years, until the very last day of the war, Soviet sources described what happened in different ways. Received serious damage. The ship's bow was torn off, but it remained in service. The official statistics of the Soviet Union stated, during the years of the Second World War, the country did not lose a single battleship. Not one. This video is about what really happened. About a ship that lived 3 lives under 3 names. About the pilot who destroyed it with 1 bomb, and about how his fate turned out. And about how a state knows how to turn a catastrophe into a legend. At the end, I will tell you about one detail that has never been explained. On the same day, September 23rd, 1941, another 1,000-kilogram bomb fell on a second Soviet battleship. A direct hit. And it didn't explode. Why? The German investigation gave no answer. That question remains open to this day. But first, we need to go back to St. Petersburg, to the Baltic shipyard. July 3rd, 1909. The ship does not yet have the name that will make it famous, but it already exists. July 3rd, 1909, St. Petersburg, Baltic shipyard. A ship was laid down on the slipway, still nameless, still without a history. Just a huge steel structure that workers assembled, rivet by rivet. It would become one of the 4 first Russian dreadnoughts, ships of a new generation that, at the beginning of the 20th century, changed the very concept of naval warfare. A battleship is not just a big ship. It is a floating fortress. It is an argument in international negotiations. It is a symbol that the country exists for real. They named it Petropavlovsk. On August 27, 1911, the ship was launched, and in December 1914, it left the shipyard quay and joined the fleet. The First World War was raging. The Petropavlovsk served in Helsingfors, as the city known today as Helsinki, the capital of Finland, was called back then. But the history of this ship, from the very beginning, turned out to be inscribed in the history of the country, with all its upheavals. In 1917, the crew of the Petropavlovsk took a direct part in the October Revolution. The sailors of the Baltic Fleet were one of the main driving forces of the revolution. The ship became part of a new world. And then, this same ship stood against it. In February 1921, the Petropavlovsk was at the center of an uprising in Kronshtadt. Sailors, workers, and part of the garrison rebelled against the Bolshevik government, the very one they had helped bring to power 4 years earlier. The leader of the rebels was Stepan Petrochenko, a man who served as a clerk on the Petropavlovsk. The uprising was suppressed, cruelly and quickly. On March 31, 1921, the ship received a new name, Marat. Think about this detail. The ship that was at the center of the mutiny against Soviet power was named after one of the symbols of the revolution, the French revolutionary Jean-Paul Marat. This is not a coincidence. This was a demonstration. The past has been crossed out. The ship belongs to a new era. In the autumn of 1928, the Marat went in for a major modernization at the home Baltic shipyard. 2.5 years of work. The number of boilers in the power plant was reduced, and the freed up space was used wisely. Anti-aircraft artillery magazines, navigation and artillery posts, a radio center, and a sonar post were placed there. The main turbines were repaired, and the outer hull plating was replaced. New superstructures and masts changed the ship's appearance beyond recognition. In April 1931, the updated Marat returned to service. In the pre-war decade, the ship lived a rich life. In 1933, during training artillery firing, a fire broke out on board, near the second main caliber turret. The immediate flooding of the turret's ammunition prevented an explosion, but 68 people died. The turret was put back into operation as early as October of that same year. In May 1937, the Marat went to Great Britain for a naval parade on the occasion of the coronation of King George VI. In December 1939, it participated in the Soviet-Finnish War, shelling Finnish fortified positions on the island of Bjorko. By 1941, the battleship had traveled more than 75,000 nautical miles. For comparison, that is almost twice around the Earth at the equator. 1,286 people served on board. A major overhaul for the ship was planned for the summer of 1941, but in the summer of 1941, the war began. June 22, 1941, Sunday. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Moscow time, German troops crossed the border of the Soviet Union. At that moment, the Marat was at the Great Kronshtadt roadstead, an open anchorage in the waters of Kronshtadt. Not in a dock, not under repair. On the water, in full combat readiness. At 2 p.m. that same day, the battleship opened fire on the enemy for the first time. The target was a Finnish reconnaissance plane that had appeared over the bay. The very next day, June 23rd, the anti-aircraft gunners of the Marat shot down 2 enemy planes. The Red Banner Baltic Fleet opened its combat score, and the Marat was the first to do so. For the next 2 months, the ship repelled air attacks every day, day after day. Air raid, repelled. Air raid, repelled. The anti-aircraft gunners worked to exhaustion. The planes returned again and again because the battleship was a target too important to abandon. On August 22nd, the situation changed. German troops approached the very outskirts of Leningrad, a city that is about 30 kilometers from Kronstadt. A direct threat to the city meant one thing: the battleship needed to be used differently. The Marat was moved to a new firing position. In the fenced-off part of the sea canal, which connects Kronshtadt with the port of Leningrad. On September 9th, the main caliber guns began to thunder. 3 turrets, 12 guns with a caliber of 305 millimeters. The firing range was up to 25 kilometers. The Marat fired at the advancing German columns almost continuously. For the German infantry, the arrival of such shells, each weighing about half a ton, was an event from another dimension. Not artillery, an earthquake. On September 14th, the ship received its first direct hits from enemy artillery shells. The damage was minor. The crew coped. The battleship continued to fire. But this is exactly where the part of the story begins that is important to understand. Because the next few days are a chain of events that directly led to the catastrophe of September 23rd. On September 16th, German artillery covered the Marat again. This time, shells hit the forward anti-aircraft platform. 3 anti-aircraft guns on the bow of the ship were knocked out simultaneously. 3 guns. This sounds like a minor loss. But on that same day, September 16th, 27 Junkers 87 dive bombers appeared over Kronshtadt. They divided into 2 groups and attacked the Marat simultaneously, from the bow and from the stern. The anti-aircraft fire was dense. Most of the planes could not break through. But the group that approached from the bow angle, exactly from the side where the 3 guns were already silent, broke through to the ship. Bombs hit the stern part. The aft anti-aircraft guns were knocked out. The 4th main caliber turret was damaged. The wardroom and several officer cabins were destroyed. 25 people died. But 3 enemy planes were shot down. The ship held firm. The battleship weighed anchor, moved to the small Kronshtadt roadstead, continuing to fire on German positions on the southern shore of the Gulf of Finland. On September 18th, the Marat was placed in the Ust-Rogatka harbor with the help of tugboats for repairs to the damage. For the next 5 days, the German Air Force attacked Kronshtadt daily. The crew worked and repelled raids simultaneously. Not a single bomb hit the ship. It seemed fate was on the side of the Marat. But the forward anti-aircraft guns still had not been repaired. Remember this detail. It will explain everything that will happen in 7 days, when dark dots appear in the sky over Peterhof again, and one of them will be flying straight at the bow of the ship. On the morning of September 23rd, visibility was excellent. Too excellent. A German reconnaissance plane circled over Kronshtadt at dawn and photographed everything it saw. Ships in the roadstead, the harbor, the Marat. And hundreds of kilometers from Kronshtadt, at an airfield south of the city of Luga, one person was already putting on his flight helmet. His name was Hans-Ulrich Rudel. He was born on July 2, 1916, in Silesia, a historic region that at that time was part of Germany and is now part of Poland. The son of a Protestant pastor, an athlete, a pilot. But at first, he was a very mediocre pilot. This is an important detail that is often overlooked. Rudel was not a prodigy. At flight school, he was characterized as an average pilot. He did not shine. He did not stand out. In the first year of the war, he was repeatedly suspended from combat missions. Commanders doubted his readiness. He flew auxiliary and reconnaissance missions while others were fighting. But then something changed. Perhaps it was the plane itself. The Junkers 87 dive bomber, which people called the Stuka, from the German word Sturzkampfflugzeug, meaning dive assault plane, required a special kind of character. Calmness under fire. Accuracy at a critical moment. The ability to hold the sights when the ground is rushing up at a speed of several hundred kilometers per hour. Rudel turned out to be exactly that kind of person. By the autumn of 1941, Oberlieutenant Rudel served in the 2nd Dive Bomber Wing, Immelmann, one of the best units of the German Air Force on the Eastern Front. The wing was named after Max Immelmann, a German ace pilot of the First World War. A tradition, a symbol of continuity. On the morning of September 23, 1941, Rudel was at the Turkovo airfield. This is a field airfield located south of the city of Luga in the Leningrad region. It is about 120 kilometers in a straight line to Kronshtadt. Let's break down what was happening at this airfield that morning. German command had received the results of the morning aerial reconnaissance. The photos were clear. The clear weather had allowed them to see every ship in the Kronshtadt harbor. The images showed four main targets: the battleships Marat and Oktyabrskaya Revolutsiya, as well as the heavy cruisers Kirov and Maxim Gorky. The task was stated directly: destroy the Soviet Baltic Fleet right in the harbor, before it could interfere with the ground offensive on Leningrad. Rudel received a special type of ammunition, not a standard bomb, a so-called anti-battleship bomb. A bomb weighing 1,000 kilograms, developed specifically for penetrating thick ship armor. Such a bomb is not taken on an ordinary sortie. It is taken when the target is steel, several dozen centimeters thick. Here, it is important to say something else. The Marat, a week before this, during the raid on September 16th, had shot down 3 German pilots, 3 planes, 3 crews. These were comrades of the people who were sitting now in the cockpits at the Turkovo airfield. Rudel was not a fanatic. He was a professional, in a situation where professionalism meant flying at a ship that had already killed people next to you. This does not make him right, but it explains why he did not hesitate. He sat in the cockpit in silence. The engines started, one after another. The planes taxied to the runway. The sky over the airfield was clear, just as clear as the sky over Kronshtadt at this moment. In a few minutes, the group of dive bombers set a course to the north, to Kronshtadt, to the Marat. And on the deck of the battleship, the morning watch was ending. Shortly after 10 in the morning, observers on the Marat noticed planes over Peterhof, dark dots on the horizon. There were more of them. Battle stations. Sailors ran along the companionways. Anti-aircraft gunners swiveled their barrels. The ship's commander, Captain Second Rank Ivanov, went up to the bridge. The main caliber crews fired a shrapnel shot at the nearest planes. The shell burst short of the target. The dive bombers divided into 2 groups. One attacked from the stern, the second from the bow. Exactly from the bow. Exactly from there, where a week ago, German shells had destroyed 3 anti-aircraft guns. From where the defense was weakest. Whether this was a coincidence or not, we do not know. Let's switch. The cockpit of a Junkers 87 dive bomber. Oberleutnant Rudel looks down through the sights. Below him is Kronshtadt. Below him is the Marat. He began his dive. The angle was 70 degrees. 80. The ground and water were rushing to meet him. From all sides, anti-aircraft fire. Shell bursts flashed near the cockpit, to the right, to the left, above. Rudel held his aim. The Marat grew in the sights. A second ago, it was a dot. Now, a ship. Now, a huge gray hull. Now, the deck, along which people were running. Rudel later recalled, in order not to collide with the commander's plane, which was in front, he increased the dive angle to 90 degrees, straight down, like a stone. He pressed the release button and pulled the control stick towards himself with all his might. The G-force from pulling out of the dive was such that he lost consciousness for a moment. This moment lasted a second, maybe 2. When he came to, the voice of his radio operator gunner was already sounding in his headphones. Herr Oberleutnant, the ship exploded. A bomb weighing 1,000 kilograms hit the forward part of the Marat and caused the ammunition of the first main caliber turret to detonate. Hundreds of shells, gunpowder charges, everything exploded at once. The artillery turret weighing several dozen tons, imagine 8 adult elephants gathered together into a single steel structure, was thrown into the air by the blast wave, flipped over, and crashed back into the breach it had left in the ship's deck itself. The huge forward superstructure, battle stations, control instruments, anti-aircraft guns, the conning tower with all its equipment, toppled onto the starboard side and went into the water. The forward smokestack fell right after it. Over the place where the bow of the Marat had been just a moment ago, a pillar of smoke 350 meters high rose. Rudel saw it as he gained altitude. A dark pillar over the gray water, in the clear September sky. At the battle stations in these seconds, 326 people died. Among them were the ship's commander, Captain Second Rank Ivanov, and the senior assistant, Captain Third Rank Chufistov. And once again, silence hung over Kronshtadt. Rudel was sure that the ship was destroyed, that the story was over, that the Marat no longer existed. He was wrong. The explosion died down. Smoke remained. Water remained, rushing into the hull. A list to the starboard side remained. The ship was slowly but inevitably leaning to one side. And people remained. Those who survived. Those who, in these seconds, climbed up from the deck, wiped blood from their faces, and began to do what they had been trained to do. The ship's command was taken over by Captain 3rd Rank Rodachev, the next senior officer among those who survived. The first task was simple and almost impossible at the same time: to correct the list. When a ship lists to one side, you can try to correct it by intentionally flooding compartments on the opposite side. It is counterintuitive, flooding your own ship to save it, but it works. The sailors flooded several compartments on the port side. The list decreased a little, but only a little. The problem was that the bow part of the Marat, everything that was in front of the second main caliber turret, was already lying on the bottom of the Kronshtadt harbor. The depth at this place was about 11 meters. This was enough for the mangled metal of the bow to rest on the ground and hold the rest of the hull tight, like an anchor holds a ship. It was impossible to fully level the Marat. The dead bow would not let it. The second task was to restore the operation of the machines. For this, steam was needed. A boiler provides steam. The boiler needs to be lit. But the explosion had broken through the watertight bulkhead under the second turret. Water rushed into the second boiler room. It is impossible to light the furnaces of flooded boilers. It's the same as trying to light a match underwater. They tried to start the surviving boiler rooms in the stern. It didn't work. Damage to the hull had violated the water tightness along the entire length of the ship. Water seeped everywhere. The steam pressure fell to zero. The steam turbine generators, the devices that produce electricity on board, stopped. The Marat lost power. Completely. All this happened within a few minutes after the explosion. Think about what this meant practically. The pumps for pumping out water were not working. The firefighting system was not working. Communication devices between compartments were not working. Normal lighting went out. Only the emergency lighting remained. Dim lamps on batteries that gave enough light so as not to bump into walls. And in this twilight, knee-deep in the icy water of the Gulf of Finland, the crew continued to work. Imagine this. September. The water in the bay is about 10 degrees Celsius above zero. Water is flooding the lower deck compartments. The light. Only hand lanterns. Outside, above their heads, German air raids continue. There is no communication between stations. No one really knows what is happening in the neighboring compartment. The sailors caulked the seams, plugged gaps and cracks with improvised materials. They set up wooden props against the deformed bulkheads, the internal partitions of the ship that were supposed to keep water from moving from compartment to compartment. They worked with their hands. They worked in silence. But the water proved stronger. It spread through the hull from bottom to top, flooding one compartment after another. Finding and closing the leaks became more difficult. The water hid them underneath. The lower deck was going underwater, compartment by compartment. Simultaneously, a fire started in the rooms under the second main caliber turret. This was a second threat, no less terrifying than the water. If the fire reaches the ammunition of the second turret, the explosion will repeat. They fought the fire with fire extinguishers. There were not enough of them. Then they stretched a fire hose from the shore, straight over the side, along the deck, down into the burning rooms. It was slow and inconvenient. But they eventually beat down the fire. About 2 hours had passed since the explosion. The emergency lighting went out. In total darkness, in the water, with fire hoses in their hands, the crew was ordered to abandon the ship. It was impossible to fight further without light, without pumps, without communication. People went out onto the upper deck, but not everyone. At the fourth main caliber turret, at the very stern, the only part of the ship that had not received serious damage, the anti-aircraft gun crews remained. They did not go anywhere. While the others were abandoning the ship, they continued to fire at the German planes circling over Kronshtadt. Think about this picture. A half-destroyed ship settling to the bottom, the bow on the ground, a list to the starboard side, darkness inside, and on the stern, working anti-aircraft guns. By the evening of the same day, September 23rd, they organized the supply of electricity to the ship from the shore via a cable. Part of the crew returned and began fighting the flooding again. They worked all night. It didn't help. On the morning of September 24th, the Marat finally lay on the ground. The ship was dead. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. End of September 1941. German troops had approached the very outskirts of Leningrad. The city was trapped in a blockade ring. Communication with the rest of the country by land was cut off. The command had to make a decision about the Marat. Here is what the situation was. The ship lay on the ground in the Ostrogatka harbor in Kronshtadt. The bow was destroyed. The first main caliber turret was destroyed. The second turret was damaged. The crew had suffered heavy losses. The ship could not move and could not give speed. But the third and fourth main caliber turrets were intact. And that meant 8 guns with a caliber of 305 millimeters. 8 barrels, each of which could send shells weighing about half a ton to a distance of up to 25 kilometers. German troops were standing near Leningrad. The distance from Kronshtadt to the front line was within the reach of these guns. The decision was made. The Marat would become a floating battery. Not a ship, a battery. A firing point that just happened to have the shape of a battleship. Work began on partially draining the stern part of the ship. Water was pumped out by the pumps of several rescue vessels. They couldn't handle it on their own. Specialists from the naval and artillery shipyards of Kronshtadt were involved in the work. People worked under the conditions of daily air raids. The Germans did not leave Kronshtadt alone. Gradually, the stern part surfaced. Not completely. The bow part still lay on the bottom and held the ship like a dead anchor. The Marat stood with a trim by the bow, that is, with its nose down, and a list to the starboard side. A strange, ugly pose for a once proud battleship. But the guns worked. On October 31st, 1941, a little over 5 weeks after the explosion, the third and fourth main caliber turrets of the Marat opened fire on German positions on the southern coast of the Gulf of Finland. Think about this date. 5 weeks ago, the ship lay on the bottom. 326 people died. The commander died. The bow part on the ground. And here, a salvo. By the end of 1941, the Marat's artillery had destroyed 18 German batteries and suppressed 87 more. It shot down 6 enemy planes. It covered with fire ship convoys that were going from Kronshtadt to Leningrad and back, along the only possible supply route for the besieged city. The Germans knew perfectly well where the Marat was standing, and they shelled it. On December 12, 1941, German artillery opened fire on the ship. Out of 23 large-caliber shells fired, 3 hit the target. 2 of them pierced the upper deck and exploded inside the ship. This posed a new task for the crew. The upper deck of the Marat was armored, but against indirect fire from heavy artillery, the ship's horizontal armor proved insufficient. They had to think of something. They came up with the following. They began to lay granite slabs from the Kronshtadt embankments on the upper deck of the battleship. Ordinary construction granite, the very same with which piers and wharves are paved. Not ship armor, not special steel. Stone. This sounds almost implausible. A combat battleship protected by pavement. But there was no choice, and it worked. True, they did not have time to finish laying the slabs. On December 28, 1941, 2 German shells hit the Marat again. One of them passed through the ship, through the artillery magazines of the 3rd main caliber turret. This is the storage for shells and gunpowder charges for the guns. Hundreds of ammunition. Everything needed for a new explosion on the scale of September 23rd. The shell did not explode. By a happy coincidence, that is exactly what is written in the documents. It just passed through and went on. If it had gone off, nothing of the Marat would have remained, even in the form it existed in. Perhaps, most of the crew would not have remained either. By this moment, the Granite deck was almost ready, and it did its job. Despite the fact that until the end of 1943, the Marat took in several more large-caliber shells, the ship did not receive any serious damage again. The stone from the Kronshtadt embankment protected what the ship's armor could not. The Marat fired, in winter and summer, in 1942 and 1943. It fired at German batteries, covered convoys, repelled air raids. In January 1944, the troops of the Leningrad front launched an offensive from the Oranienbaum bridgehead, a small section of Soviet territory on the southern shore of the Gulf of Finland, which had been held in encirclement throughout the blockade. The Marat's guns rained hundreds of shells onto the German positions. On January 17, 1944, alone, the crew fired 17 tons of ammunition at the retreating enemy. 17 tons in one day. On January 27, 1944, the Siege of Leningrad was lifted. The Marat fought until the end, without a bow, on the ground, under fire. 2 years and 4 months after the day when Rudel was sure he had destroyed it with one bomb. But while the ship was firing, something interesting was happening in the official Soviet reports. There, the Marat also existed, only it looked quite different. Let's pause for a minute. We have just traced what happened to the Marat on September 23, 1941. Ammunition explosion. 326 dead. The bow is on the bottom. The ship is without power, without electricity, without a commander. By the morning of September 24th, it had completely settled on the ground. These are facts. They are confirmed by documents, testimony of survivors, German aerial photographs, and post-war studies. And now, open the Soviet sources of that time. The picture will be different. In some publications, it is written that the Marat, as a result of the attack on September 23rd, received serious damage. In others, that the ship's bow was torn off, but it remained in service. In others, the event of September 23rd is described in passing, in one sentence, among the listing of other combat episodes. As if nothing special had happened. As if the loss of 326 people and half a ship is a work-in-progress moment worthy of one line. Why? To understand this, you need to think not as a historian, but as a person who needs to manage a huge country in a state of war. September 1941. German troops are standing outside Leningrad, outside Moscow, outside Kiev. The country is suffering monstrous losses. Every day brings bad news. In these conditions, any report about the loss of a large ship is not just a military report. It is a blow to morale. It is a question that people will immediately ask. If they sank our battleship, what will happen next? A battleship is not just a ship. It is a symbol. It is steel, power, and state pride expressed in metal and numbers. To admit that one German pilot, with one bomb, destroyed such a symbol is to admit vulnerability. They did not do that. Instead, they chose another solution. The Marat officially continued to exist as an active battleship of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet. In official documents, in reports, in statistics, a ship without a bow, lying with its stern on the ground of the Kronshtadt harbor, was officially listed as a combat unit of the fleet. From the point of view of formal logic, there was a grain of truth in this. The Marat was indeed firing. Its guns were working. Its crew was fighting. One could say, it is damaged but not destroyed. It is firing, so it is in service. But this was a truth carefully trimmed from both sides. The truth about the fact that a third of the ship was lying on the bottom was not reported. The truth about 326 people who died in one day was not reported. The truth about the fact that the Marat would never leave the harbor under its own power was not reported. And this led to one of the most amazing paradoxes of the entire Second World War. The Soviet Union lost a huge number of warships during this war. Destroyers, cruisers, submarines. The losses were heavy. But official statistics stated one thing. During the entire Second World War, the Soviet Union did not lose a single battleship. Not one. Because the Marat, officially, was not lost. It was damaged. It remained in service. Yes, it was lying on the bottom. Yes, It did not have a bow. But paper, as they say, endures everything. Think about this construction. The state did not lie in the sense that it wrote something knowingly false. It did something more sophisticated. It chose what exactly to consider the truth. What facts to include in the official picture, and which to leave outside its framework. Is the Marat firing? Yes, it is firing. So, it is in service. And everything else are details not subject to disclosure. In May 1943, the ship was renamed, quietly, without fanfare. The Marat became Petropavlovsk again, the name it had borne before the revolution. No official explanation for this decision was given. Perhaps the name Marat, by that moment, had become too firmly associated with the catastrophe of September 23rd, even in classified military documents. It was easier to change the nameplate. But the most striking thing in this story is not the lie itself. Lying during war is not rare. All sides of the conflict practice it. What is striking is something else. This lie survived the war. In Soviet publications of the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, the history of the Marat was still presented in a truncated form. Events of September 23, 1941, were still described with wording like, "The ship received heavy damage, but continued to participate in the defense of the city." The full picture of what happened on that day became available to readers much later. The state knows how to be patient, but history is also patient. And while the Marat was listed as an active battleship in Soviet reports, the person who actually destroyed it with one bomb continued to fly. And his story after September 23, 1941, is no less incredible than the story of the ship itself. Rudel gained altitude and set a course for the airfield. Below, over Kronshtadt, the pillar of smoke was still standing. He saw it out the porthole. 350 meters of dark smoke over the gray water. He was sure the mission was accomplished. The Marat was destroyed. He did not know that 5 weeks would pass, and the Marat's guns would open fire again. But Rudel himself would not know about this for a long time. He would have too much work to do. On September 23, 1941, Oberlieutenant Rudel was 25 years old. The war for him was just beginning. Behind him, the first months on the Eastern Front and 1 day over Kronshtadt. Ahead, almost 4 more years. And what would happen over these 4 years defies simple explanation. The numbers speak for themselves. By the end of the war, Rudel had completed 2,530 combat missions. This is not a typo. 2,530. For comparison, an average pilot of the German Air Force during the entire war completed from several dozen to several hundred missions. After 100, he was already considered an experienced veteran. After 200, a rare exception. Rudel flew more than 2,500 times. On his account were 519 destroyed Soviet tanks, more than 800 vehicles of various types, 50 artillery battery positions, 4 armored trains, 9 downed planes. In addition to the Marat, the sunk destroyer leader Minsk, the destroyer Stedogushi, and about 70 different landing craft. German command understood that they had a person before them who could not be lost. Rudel was repeatedly tried to be removed from combat missions. He was too valuable. Every time, he managed to get permission to fly again. In early 1945, his plane was shot down over the front line. During an emergency landing, Rudel was seriously wounded. His right leg was amputated below the knee. This happened in February 1945. There were 3 months left until the end of the war. Rudel returned to the cockpit with a prosthesis and continued to fly. This is not a legend. This is a documented fact. By the end of the war, he reached the rank of colonel and the position of commander of the 2nd Dive Bomber Wing Immelmann, the very one in which he had started. He became the only person in the history of Germany to be awarded the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords, and diamonds. This was the highest military award of the Third Reich. During the entire war, only one person received it: Rudel. Now I must tell you about what I promised at the very beginning of this video. On September 23, 1941, on the same day that Rudel struck the Marat, he took off on a repeat strike. His target was the second battleship of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet, the Oktyabrskaya Revolutsiya, a ship of the same class as the Marat, the same armor thickness, the same protection system. Rudel dropped a 1,000-kilogram bomb, a direct hit. The bomb did not explode. Think about it. The same bomb, the same pilot, the same day, the same target. A Soviet battleship. The first bomb destroyed the Marat. The second passed through the hull of the Oktyabrskaya Revolutsiya and did not trigger. German command conducted an investigation. Technical defect? Manufacturing error? Or, what sounds completely different, sabotage at the German plant where the ammunition was manufactured. The investigation gave no answer. This question remains open to this day. The Oktyabrskaya Revolutsiya survived the war. It lived until 1956 and was scrapped. No one will ever know for sure why the bomb, which should have destroyed it just like the Marat, simply did not work. Sometimes history turns out exactly like that. After the war, Rudel emigrated. He lived in Argentina, then returned to Europe. He wrote memoirs. He was associated with far-right political organizations. This is part of his biography that cannot be ignored when talking about him honestly. A man capable of incredible feats in the air, after the war, made choices that evoke unequivocal condemnation. He died on December 18, 1982. Two fates intersected for a fraction of a second in the September sky over Kronshtadt. Bomb, deck, explosion. And then they parted forever. The Marat remained in the harbor. Rudel flew away. Each of them lived their remaining years in their own way. But the finale of this story is not in the sky over Kronstadt, and not in Rudel's memoirs. The finale is in the Kronstadt harbor, in silence, in 1953. After the lifting of the Siege of Leningrad in January 1944, the front rolled to the west. The war left Kronstadt. The Marat's guns went silent. The ship remained standing in the Ust-Rogatka harbor, where it had stood all this time, bow into the ground, with granite slabs on the upper deck, with empty magazines, with 3 names in its service record. The war ended in May 1945. Conversations began about restoring the fleet, about the fates of the ships that had survived the blockade. Specialists assessed the condition of the Petropavlovsk, as the former Marat was officially called by then. The conclusion was unanimous. Restoring the ship to a fully combat-ready state was not expedient. The damage was too great. The design was too obsolete. Such work would require too much money and time. They did not restore it. On November 28, 1950, the ship received the last name in its life. It was converted into a non-self-propelled training artillery ship and named Volkov, in honor of the river flowing east of Leningrad. Not a battleship, not a cruiser. A training ship. A floating classroom for cadets. 3 names. Petropavlovsk, Marat, Petropavlovsk, Volkov. That's not even 3 names. It's 4. That many times history rewrote the nameplate on the side of this ship. In 1953, the Volkov was scrapped. No ceremonial event, no farewell salute. Workers with autogenous torches, devices for cutting metal, methodically cut the hull into parts. The steel from which they had assembled the pride of the Russian fleet at the Baltic shipyard in 1909 turned into raw material for new structures. It took several months. Then, the harbor became empty. I want you to imagine this for a second. On July 3, 1909, a ship was laid down on the slipway of the Baltic shipyard in St. Petersburg. Officers, officials, and workers were present at the ceremony. Music was playing. Someone standing in the crowd, perhaps, thought, "This ship will serve Russia for 20 years. 30. Maybe 40. It served for 44 years. It survived the First World War. It survived the Revolution. It survived a mutiny, which it had led itself, or rather, on the board of which it was born. It survived the Civil War, Modernization, the Soviet-Finnish War, the 22nd of June, 1941, 2 years of blockade, hundreds of air raids, dozens of artillery shellings, 1,000-kilogram bomb that killed 326 people and tore off its bow. And after all this, an autogenous torch in 1953. It is unfair. I think it is unfair. But history is rarely fair. It just happens. What is left of the Marat? History remains. The very one that Soviet propaganda spent decades trying to simplify into the wording, received damage but remained in service. History turned out to be more stubborn than propaganda. It survived. Names remain. 326 people who died on September 23, 1941. Captain 2nd Rank Ivanov. Captain 3rd Rank Chufistov. Sailors, foremen, officers whose names did not make it into the newspapers and were not carved in stone in central squares. They were there. They were doing their job. A paradox remains, the very one we started with. The Soviet Union officially did not lose a single battleship in the Second World War. This statistic exists to this day in a number of historical references. It was born of a ship that lay on the bottom, but officially was considered alive. An unanswered question remains. A 1,000-kilogram bomb that did not explode on the Oktyabrskaya Revolutsiya. A technical defect, or someone's conscious hand at the German plant? We don't know. We likely will never know. And the image itself remains. A ship without a bow. Stern on the ground. Granite instead of armor. Anti-aircraft guns on the stern that fire while everything else is sinking. This is not a metaphor for resilience. This is a literal description of what was happening in the Kronshtadt harbor for 2 years and 4 months. Sometimes I think about this. The Marat died on September 23, 1941. This is the truth. But it also fought until January 1944. This is also the truth. Both truths exist simultaneously, and neither of them can be crossed out. Perhaps this is the true history of the ship. Not in official reports, not in Rudel's memoirs, not in the statistics of victories and losses, but in the fact that it fired. As long as it could, it fired. And once again, silence hung over Kronshtadt. This time, forever.